Friends, welcome to the next lecture of Indirect Taxation GST CA Final lecture series. In the previous lectures, we have studied what the definition of supply is, what is taxable supply, non-taxable supply, what is the meaning of consideration, and what is the meaning of course and furtherance of business. Now, other than these three statements, the taxable event is also defined in uh, in other cases as well. For example, there is Schedule 1, which gives the definition of deemed supply. So, the three basic components of a taxable event or of a supply under GST is supply, consideration, and course and furtherance of business. Now, those cases where the exceptions to the parameters are, they this would be studied in today's lecture. So, the two parameters of supply, that is made for consideration but not in course or furtherance of business, and then supply made without consideration. So first we will look at those supplies which are made for consideration but they are not in course or furtherance of business. What are those supplies? So see, section 7 subsection 1 clause B says importation of service. So when you import any service, mind it, service, not good. When you import any service either on a personal capacity or in course or furtherance of business, so irrespective of whether the service is taken for business or for personal consumption, it would be treated as supply under GST. ठीक है, this is section 7 subsection 1 and clause B. For example is also given. A proprietor receives architect services for personal residence. So that consultancy or these architect services, that is when you receive from outside India, then that import of service is, even if it is for a personal use, for personal consumption, it is still a supply under GST. This is the first, uh, this was the first exception. Okay. The second exception is supply made but there is no consideration. So obviously, in let me show you. See, it has to be S plus C plus B. Okay. Now, when there is no consideration, okay, when there is no consideration, when there is no consideration, they must be present. Now, this is called as deemed supply. Okay. Why? Because in commercial transactions, ठीक है, it's not only money that helps in growing of business. It is not only money which is actually required to survive in business. Now there are many other modes of transaction as well where money is not the sole criteria to determine whether a transaction or an event has happened or not. So in that case, the taxation law should also be more flexible and should also be more inclusive, that is, so that such taxable events can be easily gauged or assessed. See, so schedule 1, these, it is given for those activities. It actually, schedule 1 is actually a deemed supply definition. So those activities which would be treated as a supply even if not made without consideration. See, in this one, what was it? Uh, Wait, this was S plus C plus B. Okay, now in the importation one, what we understood? This is right, this is also present, but this is not present. Okay, this one. Okay, now we will study the deemed supply. So instead of going into details, let me summarize it for you. There are four situations for deemed supply. Four. And what are they? First is permanent transfer or disposal of business assets. Now, if I'm transferring my assets, my business assets, or disposing the business, right? When we close the business, then the assets needs to be disposed. Now on those assets, I already have availed ITC. I have taken the input, that is, my tax liability was reduced. Now such such it was that input was given for what? So that my business would continue, so my outward tax liability would increase, would be would, if there would be my outward tax liability, then that input will help me to discharge my tax liability. Now I don't want, I will not, my outward tax liability will not increase, and I have taken input also on the previous tax liability. So instead of being an intermediary, I become the end consumer. Let me draw it for you. What it means to say is, see, there was supplier 1, sold it to me. Okay. Okay. And there is government, and there is end consumer. Okay. Now what happens is, yes, what happens is, he will sell, okay, and will pay uh, will pay tax to government, okay, tax, and he will sell. Okay. Now the whole concept of ITC is, he will claim ITC, okay, and then will sell to him, okay. Okay. Now in this, the tax liability over here, he will receive tax, he will give him, he will give him tax, he also gave him tax, yeah, and therefore he will have to pay. Now after adjusting, he will pay tax again to government, okay, yeah, T2, obviously T1 is less than T2, yeah. Now suppose, this transaction never happens, okay. So he actually, this party actually becomes the end consumer, okay. So the outward tax liability should have been, it should have been settled by him. Yeah. T1 is less than T2. ठीक है. The outward tax liability should have been settled by him, but he has taken, this person has taken already, ITC has already been taken. So government gets what? The final amount that the government gets in this case is T2 minus ITC. Yes. Yes. In this case. But the government, but if he is the final consumer, then the government must get T1. Okay. Now, had he would have got this if the transaction was happening. Okay. But if the transaction was not happening, the government should get T1. But if the ITC has been availed, okay, the ITC was availed, that is, the government gets T1 minus ITC. Is it clear? In situation where the supplier is the final consumer and ITC has been availed, then government is getting this tax. Then the government is getting this tax. But the government must get this tax if he is the final consumer, right? So this ITC which was availed and there is no further supply of business, then this ITC needs to be reversed. Yes. So when this ITC needs to be reversed, when there is no other further supply, and when this happens, when there is a closure of business. When there is a closure of business. Sorry. So when there is a closure of business, this ITC needs to be reversed. That means कि disposal of business is what? Is a deemed supply. So when it means that if ITC has been availed and there is a disposal of business assets, so how the government will look into this? The government, what does the government wants? The government wants that when you are disposing of, no business would be done. So if you are selling the assets, okay, so even it's not in the course of business, selling is not his business. These assets, for example, one fridge is there, AC is there, so he has no business related to selling of AC or fridge. Maybe he is a biscuit seller. Yeah. So but this, even though it's not in course or furtherance of business, yet it is a supply, it is a deemed supply, and therefore it would be under GST. So what would be its tax? So if it is a supply, tax, what would be its tax? It's a supply, इस पे CGST लगेगा, इस पे SGST लगेगा, और क्या होगा वो? यही तो था ITC, इसी का इसने ITC लिया था ना. तो ये ITC जो इसने लिया है, जो इसने यूज़ कर लिया है, it needs to be reversed or pay tax on that. If this is, both are equivalent, because when the supplier bought these capital assets or these assets, at that point of time he paid some tax, and that tax which was paid to the supplier by the recipient or the second supplier, that was reflected in his return as ITC. Now, either you reverse that ITC from ledger or you pay tax to government. Both are equivalent. Hope it's understood well. So, permanent transfer or disposal of business assets where ITC has been availed. Second point is the supply of goods or service both between related persons or between distinct person as specified in section 25. Why section 25 is written over here? Because section 25 deals with registration. Distinct person has been defined over there when made in the course or furtherance of business. So there is no need of consideration if related person are there. For example, related person has been defined in GST Act. And who are related person? Who are related person? Related person or related person. One, family, of course. Spouse and dependent parents, yeah, brother, yeah, sister. Second, who are related person? Who else are related person? Then one controlling two firms, two GSTN, then they are related person. Then two controlling one GST, then they are related person. मतलब two people or two individual controlling one GST, neither two person, may be individual or not individual. 4, okay, we will look into the definition of a related person when we'll come into this section of there is an explanation of related person. There are, I think, 5 important criteria, but now we will look into deemed supply. Goods or service or both between related. There is supply between related person or between distinct person. There is something called or. As specified, distinct person. Who are distinct person? Same PAN but 2 GST. They are distinct person. If in two different states, then 2 GST is necessary. If in same state, 2 GST is not necessary, but the firm can think about getting 2 registration. Okay, they are distinct person. Why distinct person? Because see, distinct person means what? They both are two different identities. So as and when the GSTN is new or the another GSTN is there, they are two different individual. They are not same, even though the underlying PAN and Aadhaar are same. Okay. Now gifts not exceeding 50,000 rupees in value in a financial year, provided that gifts not exceeding 50,000 rupees in value in a financial year by an employer to an employee shall not be. So, between employer and employee, if there is a gift more than 50, if there is a transaction related to a gift which is more than 50,000 or 50,000, not exceeding means either it is more than or equal to 50,000, then again that is also a supply. Deemed supply of goods to principal to his agent. Now if, see, there are two different situations. I'll explain it about principal and agent. Where the agent undertakes the supplies to supply such goods on behalf of principal, or agent undertakes to receive such goods on behalf of the principal. Okay, so I'll show you what this agent wala matlab. See, principal and agent. Okay, so if bill, invoice, if here also invoice, if it is in his name, if it is in his name, then it's a forward supply. But if the invoice is issued in his name, sorry, if the invoice is issued in the name of agent, then it's a forward supply. Okay, he is no more an agent but a supplier. But if is issued in the name of principal, then there is no role of agent over here. So what does the act says is principal to his agent, even if to supply, and agent to his principal, where agent undertakes to receive such goods, by an agent to his principal, where the agent undertakes to receive such goods. The final one is of deemed suppliers. Is it clear? So agar if a supply between principal and his agent, where agent says that yes, I will sell it or supply it on behalf of you, then it's a deemed supply. If agent supplies to his principal, where agent undertakes to receive such goods on behalf of principal, so I will receive it, I will send it to you, that is also a deemed supply. And the final one, which we have already seen, that import of service between related person or from any other establishment outside India in the course or furtherance of business. So import in the course or furtherance of India, course or furtherance of business, even without consideration, is what is a deemed supply. For example, but not see, if a consideration is missing, then it has to be supply as well as course or furtherance of business. If supply is not missing, if business is missing, then the other two must be satisfied. Okay, so this is what deemed supply actually of schedule 1 is. Now, as seen earlier, section 7 subsection 1 clause C provides that supply includes the activities specified in schedule 1, made or agreed to be made without a consideration. Thus, there are activities or transactions which are treated as supply even if they are made without consideration. These are specifically mentioned in schedule 1 appended to the CGST Act and of course to the other acts. Schedule 1, in the following 4 cases, activities made without consideration will be treated as supply under section 7. Section 9 is charging section. Section 7 is supply, definition of supply.